Thanks everyone for being here tonight. This is a presentation on what every parent needs to know about fentanyl. And so thank you for being here. We know there's many graduations and special events happening this evening. However, we do feel this is imperative that we get this message out tonight and we continue with this message all year. And as parents, we need you to talk to your kids about fentanyl and to other parents as well about experiences and things like that. But we need to get the word out on fentanyl and keep drumming away. We continue to hear the tragic stories about fentanyl overdoses, especially amongst young people. These are kids who are dying because they bought fake prescription drugs off of social media and mostly on their cell phone. Pills like Adderall, Xanax, and Percocet. Unfortunately, these pills can be laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. And one thing you can be sure of is that one pill can kill. As we head into summer and our kids are going to be out of school with more time to hang around with their friends, it's imperative that parents talk to their kids about substance abuse and the dangers of fentanyl. So we need to address this terrible trend of deaths here in San Diego County. And we do have a champion in this effort, and this is District Attorney Summer Steffen. She's going to be speaking tonight along with some other speakers here as well. We're going to try to end the presentations by 7 p.m. so that we have a time to get to our presenters or get to your questions as best we can at 7 o'clock. And as Miles had said, if we can't get to them, all of them, we'll at least email you back some answers to some questions that we couldn't get to them. So I'm going to be kind of rough on the speakers, holding everyone to their time limit. So as I mentioned, our District Attorney, Summer Steffen, she's been raising awareness for several years about fentanyl. And it's my pleasure to introduce our District Attorney, Summer Steffen, to speak up now and welcome Summer Steffen.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Desmond, and for partnering on this life-saving effort, because knowledge is power. And I am so grateful for all of the people that have joined us tonight. We're hoping that this message that's going to come to you from different experts on every side of medical, prosecution, local and federal law enforcement is going to make a difference and is going to keep your family safe. It's my honor now to introduce Dr. Campman. Dr. Stephen Campman is the county's chief medical examiner. In that role, he's responsible for the investigation, toxicology, and pathology of sudden and unexpected deaths resulting from accidental, homicidal, suicidal, or toxicity. Dr. Campman and his team are important partners in the process of finding justice and resolution for families and the community. And on a personal note, I can tell you that Dr. Campman is a real treasure for our community. He's not just the medical examiner, but he really cares about the families and is always working around the clock to bring resolution and answers. Dr. Campman.
Okay, now, thank you, DA Steffen. Miles, do you have the slides to go?
Yes, let me pull this up shortly here.
Thanks. I have just a bit to talk about, mainly about what's happened to people in our county over the last several years, what fentanyl has done to the people of our county over the last several years, and then a bit about what it's now doing to minors, to kids in our county. Next, please. So accidental overdoses in our county have increased over the last several years. From last year alone, there was a 16.7% increase in deaths from fewer than 1,000, 976 to probably 1,138. I say probably because we still actually have some investigations to close from the end of 2021. So our final data aren't ready yet. But that actually represents a 200% increase in all accidental overdose deaths from 2016. Next. For fentanyl in our county, we've had an exponential growth in deaths caused by fentanyl. So in 2020, of our 976 accidental overdose deaths, 462 of them were due to fentanyl. That's almost half, 47%. In 2021, we're right around, our count is around more than 800, around 817, and it may go up to 825 when all is done. Deaths due to fentanyl, and that represents 72% of all overdose deaths in our county. And the most shocking thing to me is that's more than a 2,300% increase in deaths due to fentanyl just since 2016. Next. We're here to talk about fentanyl, but I cannot talk about fentanyl now in our county without talking about methamphetamine too. About half or more than half of our deaths caused by fentanyl have methamphetamine. Right now, for 2016, about 716 deaths were due to fentanyl, due to methamphetamine. And that's almost a 30% increase from the year before, and also about a 200% increase since 2016. Next. And the co-occurrence of fentanyl and methamphetamine is increasing a lot. In the middle of 2021, there was about a 296% increase in that combination compared to 2020. And compared to the year before, it was a 662% increase in the co-occurrence of methamphetamine and fentanyl. Next. And now for our kids. Looking at all fatal overdoses in our county for people 17 and under, the information is here. So in 2016, 4 children, 17, 3 children, none in 18, 3 in 2019, then 6 in 2020, and 15 in 2021. And looking at the far right column, the number of deaths due to fentanyl, the one with the asterisk there was a toddler that got a pill, toddled around and found a pill. So not a teenager that took a pill, but a toddler that stumbled upon a pill and ate it. Otherwise, the numbers have increased quite a lot in the last 2 years, exponentially, kind of like in the whole population for our kids. So fentanyl is increasing a lot in our kids as well. Mr. Supervisor?
Sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. Campman, for that information, and we appreciate it. Hopefully you're going to stick around for any questions we might have at the end here. But so next I want to introduce, and this is very sad, it's Matt White and Laura Binker White. We're saddened and grateful that they're here and joining us this evening, and they're going to share their story about their son, Connor. Losing a child is absolutely devastating. And we understand, when we talk about these types of things, they aren't easy, but we're, happy to have Matt White and Laura Binker White here tonight to tell us about their experience losing their son, Matt. So I'm sorry, their son, Connor. So Matt, if you're ready, could you unmute and speak? I think you're going first.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor. So as was mentioned, my name is Matt White, and Laura will be following just after me after I'm done. And we're kind of working together on this and trying to send out a coherent message. We are the parents of Connor White. Connor died from a fentanyl poisoning May 5th, 2021. He is one of the nearly 60,000 people who died from fentanyl poisoning in the United States last year. We're here to tell a story and offer a warning to parents about the incredible risks teenagers are taking when it comes to street drugs. Connor would have graduated from Cathedral Catholic High School 2 Saturdays ago if he were still here with us. He was a 4.0 AP student, member of the football team, an incredibly hard worker. This doesn't mean that he was perfect, Like many adolescents, he liked to push the boundaries. Unlike when we were growing up, pushing those boundaries has become much more dangerous. Connor did not overdose taking a handful of pills. He died from taking one pill. One of the thousands of pills circulating in the street drug markets that contain a lethal amount of fentanyl. Anyone taking a pill that has not been prescribed by their doctor runs the risk of obtaining one of these poison pills. On the night of May 4th, Connor obtained one of these poison pills from a drug dealer he thought was a friend. It was a counterfeit Percocet, a blue pill with M30 stamped on it. Whenever they have a fentanyl bust, you always see baggies full of these blue pills. He took the pill in the morning, May 5th, when he was alone. There was nobody there to save him. As parents, Laura and I have spent the last year questioning what we could have done differently. We were aware Connor was experimenting with drugs. Starting in January 2021, we tested him regularly for various drugs. We had educated him about gateway drugs and the dangers of fentanyl. He had been present for multiple school presentations about the dangers of drug use and addiction. But somewhere in his developing teenage brain, he thought it wouldn't happen to him. We're here to say that it can happen to anyone who risks taking an unprescribed pill. Any parent can educate their child about the dangers of drug use. We're here to say that there needs to be a much more detailed and holistic approach to this multivariable problem. Sometimes it's not enough to only talk about the dangers of drugs. Sometimes you have to address a wider range of experiences your teenager might be going through. Laura will now talk a little bit about this multivariable problem and talk about some of the things that we wish maybe that we would have done differently. Laura.
Good evening, parents. I'm Connor's mom, Laura. And I think the natural instinct for most parents is to hear our story and think something like this would never happen to them. I felt the same way. Connor strived to be the best in whatever he pursued. And Matt and I had extensive conversations with Connor about drugs. At the time, we unfortunately didn't know anything about the prevalence of fentanyl and how lethal it could be. I'm absolutely devastated from the loss of Connor. It's obviously a parent's worst nightmare, but I'm not here for pity or sympathy. I'm here to help others become educated about the dangers of fentanyl and provide some steps to help their child safe. First and foremost, erase from your mind that my child will never do drugs. Just like you, Matt and I were very engaged parents that were involved with our son's life, but we live in a different world today. Drug dealers prey on our children, and social media apps like Snapchat allow street drugs to be delivered right to our home within minutes. With the recent legislation of marijuana, many teens and young adults think it's just as safe as alcohol. As a result, the legislation of marijuana is introducing more teens to drug dealers, which is creating a perfect storm during the national fentanyl crisis. So as a parent, what can you do? First, educate yourself about fentanyl, including changes in your child's behavior and steps you can take if it's ingested. More specifically, look for unusual behaviors such as drowsiness and purchase Narcan and learn how to administrate this. Although Matt and I were not home when Connor died, having the understanding to administrate Narcan might make a difference and save your child's life. After you feel that you are educated and understand what fentanyl can do, educate your child by sharing what happened if you take just one pill. Also, make sure that you understand these drug dealers are not their friends. They're trying to get your teen hooked on a highly addictive drug so that they come back for so that they can come back for more. In most cases, the teens initially told the drug is something else, such as Percocet. Emphasize how taking street drugs are a high risk. Talk about street drugs since there are a variety of options that may be laced with fentanyl. Second, if you think there's a chance your child might be taking drugs, drug test them. I know this will be painful, but knowing the results will help you determine how to help your child. Last, make sure you know their friends and their parents. Know who they're hanging around with and know any newcomers that are coming to the group. Stay connected with those parents and support each other. Building awareness among the parent community is key to fighting this. There is one last thing that I would like to say. Fentanyl deaths are often labeled as an overdose, which is initially made extremely hard for me to discuss Connor's death with anyone. When I can't come to realize is Connor was not a druggie that got negligent and overdose. He was a normal teen that was poisoned. These dealers deceive naive young adults into buying what seems to be a relatively safe prescription drug, but they're not.
Thank you, Laura. We appreciate it. We appreciate you and Matt. And I know this is very painful for you to have to relive this all the time, but thank you very much for standing up and then talking to other parents and letting them know. And please stick around and as we get to the questions. Summer.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Desmond, and thank you again, Laura and Matt. It was an honor to be with you this week and again this evening, and you are truly honoring Connor's memory by trying to save other lives. It's my pleasure now to introduce Assistant U.S. Attorney Adam Gordon. Adam Gordon is an Assistant United States Attorney here in the Southern District. He has served as Criminal Division Opioid Coordinator for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of California since 2019. In this position, Adam prosecutes drug dealers whose distribution of drugs resulted in a victim's death or injury. Adam, thank you for joining us tonight to present the federal perspective. I know that you are excellent partners in fighting this epidemic together on the state and federal side.
Thank you, Summer, for that introduction. Thank you, Supervisor Desmond, for having us. I'm going to start at a place where, unfortunately, I spend a lot of my days. I sit on couches. What do I mean by that? I sit on couches in all parts of San Diego County. And on those couches, I look and I see pictures. I see pictures of people playing softball, of quinceañeros, ballet classes. And I ask parents 3 questions when I sit on these couches. First, what was your son or daughter like? Second, how would your friends have described your son or daughter? And then third, how did your son or daughter's death affect your family? The cases we prosecute for federal prosecution are drug dealers who provide fatal doses of fentanyl that kill members of our community. Unfortunately, members of those communities are young, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. On the federal side, we have a 20-year mandatory minimum associated with the distribution of fentanyl that results in death or serious bodily injury. I want to back up just a little bit and talk about what the federal efforts are to try to interdict fentanyl. First, what is fentanyl? It's a synthetic morphine, right? It's not made from a plant. So they're precursors that come from Southeast Asia and China, and then the actual fake pills are manufactured in Mexico and then smuggled across the border. So the U.S. Attorney's Office, along with our federal partners, targets the precursors, the labs, the drug trafficking organizations, all of which bring fentanyl along with other controlled substances into the country. Now, specifically with our office, we obviously have two enormous ports of entry with the San Ysidro Port of Entry and Otay Mesa Port of Entry. Unfortunately, because of our proximity, we have access to millions upon millions of fake pills. And as we know, based on the seizure numbers, when we have seizures of counterfeit pills, inevitably, they come back as laced with fentanyl. So the idea that there is recreational drug use, I hate that term. It's a misnomer. It doesn't exist anymore. What Supervisor Desmond was saying, what District Attorney Summer Stephan was saying is exactly right. One pill can kill. It's as simple as that. And I would beg you today to have conversations with your children. The conversations need to be relatively straightforward because there has been a destigmatization associated with the use of marijuana, right? We think of drugs now as something that's just part of the culture. And frankly, the risks associated with drug use when I was growing up or any of these panelists were growing up was much different. It is a fundamentally different assignment today being a parent. Just for example, what do we see in the phones? When you're searching through your child's phone, looking at Snapchat and Instagram, these sales are being conveyed by emojis, like a football can stand for a Xanax pill or an oxycodone pill, right? Things that you would never imagine, but these are part of the conversations that are happening in terms of your child potentially being solicited by drug dealers, because this is what these individuals are. They are willing to sell drugs, and do they think that they're going to kill someone? I don't think so. But are they being criminally reckless in providing these pills that have a high probability of killing somebody? That's the unfortunate reality, is that the people who are willing to sell drugs to students just don't care, period. End of sentence. And I wish it was different, and I wish the reality was different. But as the numbers that Dr. Campman has shown, those fatalities associated with criminal overdoses, associated with minor overdoses are going to continue to climb. And it is a devastating, devastating thing. So there's a couple things I wanted to talk to you with before turning it back over to James Fontaine from the District Attorney's Office in Summer. With regards to what you're seeing from pills, know that yes, there are drug dealers providing, but often it's friends who provide these pills to other students as well. And friends are not trying to endanger other friends' lives, but they're getting the pills from a secondhand source or a third-hand source. Unless somebody's actually getting the pills from the pharmacy, there's no proof of where these pills came from. So often we see these overdoses, not just from drug sales, but from just parties that are going on in people's houses and people's bedrooms. And unfortunately, the idea of a child having an expectation of privacy is important, but there is just a greater risk associated with allowing a child to have sort of an unbridled ability to have these transactions at the night of day and to have these parties and have these opportunities to consume drugs. Because honestly, what we see from the youth is that they're more willing to take pills than, to use heroin or for any reason to crush and then snort or to use drugs intravenously. All of that seems like that they're consuming a drug in a very specific quote addiction pattern. That pills to them a lot of times just seems very benign. It's just a pill that a friend potentially gave me or a friend got from somebody else. So I very much appreciate the time and being able to speak with you. The law enforcement efforts here are critical, but I would beg of everyone who's on this call just to take an opportunity tomorrow to speak to your children about the risks associated with these counterfeit pills. So thank you very much, Summer.
Thank you, Adam Gordon, for letting us know the federal perspective and for the audience to understand that you are on the federal side going after the precursors, trying to stop them, trying to stop the entry into our region. As we well know, that San Diego's become the largest entry point for fentanyl for the nation. This is a massive struggle and challenge for law enforcement on the federal and state side, and makes the supply availability so prevalent in our region. At this point, it's our honor to give you a little bit about the stateside perspective about fentanyl, its prevention, the protection of victims and families, and how we prosecute these cases. With me today to present this presentation is James Fontaine. James Fontaine is the chief of our major narcotics division. He has prosecuted himself major cartels and major drug dealers, but he has a heart for families. Just today, he met with a family that lost their child to this scourge of drugs that is happening. And James has been a prosecutor for 22 years and has risen through the ranks to become chief of the South Bay region and also the chief of our major narcotics region, where I've asked him to bring his talents and his expertise to address the fentanyl epidemic. So let me start with, if I can start with this PowerPoint. I'm gonna go through it with you, and then I'll have James go through some major things for parents to look for, major tips, and hopefully we'll also get to some questions. First, let me stop and kind of focus on this figure that is happening in the United States that makes this of such great concern that Supervisor Desmond and I are partnering to bring this awareness. And that's that in 2021, essentially 100,000 people lost their lives in the United States to overdose deaths, but 75,000. So, pretty much the numbers are the opioid and the fentanyl epidemic. Next slide. This number is really critical to me, and it stopped me in my tracks. It is what we've experienced here in San Diego. It's what I experience in every event that I go to, where I get approached by someone that has lost a loved one to fentanyl. It is a very common occurrence. Almost when people walk up to me now, I can see this look of complete loss and desperation for the sudden death of a loved one that came from fentanyl. And when you look at the data and you see the top 10 leading causes of death in 2021 for people 18 to 45 in the prime of their life, fentanyl leads that number by almost double, by 40,000. It is staggering. Just a far second is motor vehicle accidents. And then another far third is suicide, COVID, heart disease, homicide, cancer, other drugs, liver disease. We have to pause on this figure because as we recently had a discussion with Dr. Gupta, who is the National Director for Drug Policy, the drug czar, what we wanted to bring attention to is what we want for our parents and for our families is we want a daily conversation and attention to what is causing the number one cause for death of young people in the United States, this figure that we see before us. Next slide. When we look, and Dr. Kempen already went through this, and we look at the fact that in 2019, before the COVID situation began, we had 152 overdose deaths from fentanyl, and we saw it immediately climb during the COVID pandemic to 462 and then to 805 and still counting. Again, this is a staggering crisis that requires all of us, law enforcement, leaders, and community and parents that are so powerful for us to address it together. Next slide. What have we done about this? In San Diego, we have taken an approach of attacking this on every level. Attacking it by taking out the drug dealers, by tracking these overdose deaths, which the whites mentioned is not an overdose. It is murder by poisoning. It's people who are taking something that they don't realize is a counterfeit object that is made specifically to deceive them by making it look like something from a pharmacy. This is truly despicable, deceptive practices that the drug dealers have stooped down to. At least in the past, they used to sell a drug that looked like a drug. It looked like cocaine. It looked like methamphetamine. Now they are selling something that is counterfeit and made specifically to look like a pharmaceutical pill or other, Xanax, Adderall, Percocet, things that people feel a comfort with because they've seen it in their lifetime, whether due to a sports injury or something else. This makes us mad on the law enforcement side, and it makes us want to fight this. And the way we fight it in San Diego, which has become a national model, it's led by the DEA, and it's called Homicide Team 10. And this team has partners from the US attorneys, the DEA, the DA's office. We have an investigator and a coordinator assigned to this. And every time there's an overdose death, especially suspected to be fentanyl, the investigators, detectives arrive at the scene and they treat it like a murder. And they track back to try to find the drug dealer for two reasons. One is to hold the drug dealer accountable. But number two, and just as important, it's to stop the drug dealer from selling the same substance to the next unsuspecting victim, to take that bad batch, if you will, out of their hands. From this team, we've been able to prosecute a couple of murder cases. In one instance, the drug dealer, sadly, was a substance abuse counselor and knew the dangers. In another, the drug dealer knew that the person they sold the fentanyl to died, and they were willing to sell it to the undercover agent, showing that malice state of mind. We also have done the prevention side by partnering with Supervisor Desmond like we're doing tonight, by bringing a holistic approach of bringing to high schools this education. High schools is almost too late. We need to start younger to make sure kids get it. And by doing things like with Crime Stoppers, having information on a Hollandia dairy, doing short films, having partnerships throughout the county with our prescription drug task force and our meth task force, working together to stop this. But the piece that is so critical is that awareness piece. Next slide. There are many resources that are available, but I want to now turn it over to James Fontaine to talk about the top 5 things to look for and to look for signs when you see an overdose happening. James?
Hello, everyone. And thank you, Summer, for the introduction. And thank you, Supervisor Desmond, for organizing this forum and allowing me and everyone here to talk to families tonight about illicit fentanyl in our community. And as Summer said, in addition to my work prosecuting those people who unlawfully sell drugs, as chief of the Major Narcotics Division, I have many opportunities to work with partners that share in this fight against illicit fentanyl, doctors in the community, treatment providers, law enforcement officers. And in the course of that cooperation, I've learned a few things about illicit fentanyl. And so I put together a top 5 things every parent needs to know about illicit fentanyl. And that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. And so I have just a few minutes. I'm going to go through them relatively quickly, but if you have questions, I'll be here and we'll all be here and happy to answer those questions for you during the Q&A segment of tonight's forum. So if I could have the first slide and starting with number 1, my top 5, and that's that fentanyl comes in a pill or a powder. And you're going to hear some of this stuff. You've already heard some of these things. You'll probably hear it again after I speak. It's important that you hear it more than once and that it really sinks in. We've talked a lot about pills tonight. You have to know, or you should know, that it's found, illicit fentanyl in our community is found either in a pill or in white powder. And the pill, as you've heard now, is made to look like legitimate medication. Oxycodone, Percocets. They're often stamped with the letter M on one side and the number 30 on the other. They're referred to commonly as M30s, Mexican blues, and the pills are often blue in color, but we've seen them in a variety of colors. And a recent DEA lab study found that of all the counterfeit pills seized that contained fentanyl, 4 out of 10 of them contained a potentially fatal dose of fentanyl. And number 2, before I go on to number 2, I want to point out the powder, because even though we're talking a lot about pills, and we see so many of these, millions. Last year alone, the DEA seized over 20 million pills coming across the border. But it's powder as well, and our kids are getting into powder as well and dying from it. So I don't want to understate that that's also a threat, and you need to be aware of that too. Number 2, please. It's being sold on social media, it being fentanyl. The counterfeit pills that are made to look exactly like legitimate OxyContin, Percocet, Xanax, and Adderall, but containing fentanyl, contains methamphetamine at times, other harmful drugs, and they're being marketed in a variety of social media apps. Snapchat is one of them, Instagram is another, Facebook. And what you need to know as parents, and if there are kids listening here, sorry, I'm giving it up, but parents, you need to know that your teens often have more than one account on any social media platform. They have a quote, parent-friendly account, and then they have the secret account, the hidden account that if you were to search, you would never see, you wouldn't know about those conversations going on. So that, again, you need to have honest conversations with your kids about what they're doing online. It's too dangerous now to just trust and assume that they're being safe. Have that discussion. And here's a takeaway that's already been stated, but it can't be stated enough. I want this to really hit home for all of you. And that's that if it wasn't prescribed to you by a doctor and come from a legitimate pharmacy, then the chances are incredibly high that what you are getting is counterfeit and that it contains a potentially fatal dose of fentanyl. Next slide, please. Number 3, and this is important too, the drug dealer doesn't look like one. What I mean here is that oftentimes the person supplying the fentanyl is known to your son or daughter. And you may, as you hear this or you think about drug dealers in the community, we tend to have ideas of what they look like from movies and television. And they're the scary person that is in the shadows of alleyways. But that's not the reality. They oftentimes go to the same school as your son or daughter. They're involved in the same activities. They may even be good friends with your son or daughter. Your son or daughter trusts them. And these people oftentimes don't have any real intent to harm your son or daughter. And in many cases, the dealer has no idea that the substance they are providing actually contains fentanyl. Gone are the days when people needed to travel to, quote, scary parts of town to buy drugs from potentially dangerous unknown drug dealers. Next slide. Number 4 of the top five is, how do you recognize when a fentanyl overdose is occurring? And so with a fentanyl overdose or any opioid overdose, what you're going to see is the body becomes limp, the person is unresponsive. It may appear that they're in a deep sleep. You may hear an exaggerated, rough snore. Overdose death investigators refer to that snore as the death rattle. They call it that because what's happening is the body is struggling to breathe. Fentanyl and opioids are a respiratory depressant. That means that the breathing may be slow, may be erratic, or it may actually just cease and stop altogether. The pupils in the eyes of someone experiencing a fentanyl overdose, they constrict into pinpoints. And the lips and fingertips of that person can turn blue if they're pale skinned, or a gray if they're dark skinned. That's another indication to you that there's a lack of oxygen in the body. And the last point, incredibly important point that I want to share with you, if we could have the next slide, number 5, is what do you do? What do you do if you're with someone who's experiencing an overdose from fentanyl or any opioid? First thing is you want to try and arouse them. Make sure that they are actually overdosing. You hear that snoring, they're limp and unresponsive, yell at them, something shocking. See if they respond. I've heard some people say, well, you can yell, hey, the cops are here. That might wake them up. And if they respond, that's obviously a good sign. If they're not responding, you can use the knuckles of your hand and rub hard on their sternum. Medics do that all the time to see if they can get a response from people. And it's painful, but if that gets a response, good, that's a win. If you're getting no response after yelling and no response after that sternum rub, then call 911. Let the operator know that you're dealing with someone who is not responsive and someone who is not breathing. You may need to perform rescue breathing. If they're struggling to breathe, they're not getting that oxygen. You're seeing those blue lips, you're seeing the blue fingertips. They've been doing that snoring. Help them with the oxygen, rescue breathing if needed. And then if you have Narcan, naloxone, Narcan is just another name for naloxone. Follow the directions on that box and administer the naloxone. And continue with rescue breathing if needed. If you get no response after a minute of administering that first dose, administer another dose of that Narcan. And then continue with that rescue breathing until medics arrive. And so that's my top 5 for you, parents. I think that's something that you really should think about. My understanding is these presentations were made available to you. If you have questions, you can reach out to me at the district attorney's office, and I'm more than happy to share with you this information and more information. So thank you for that. I'll turn it back over now to Supervisor Desmond for the next introduction.
Well, thank you, James. I really appreciate great presentation, and those top 5 things are very, very important. So thank you for putting that together. Next, we have 2 more speakers. Next, we're going to get to Dr. Lev. Ronit Lev, MD, is board certified in emergency and addiction medicine and practices on the front lines. She was the first Chief Medical Officer of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy from 2018 to 2020. And after being the chief of the emergency department at Scripps Medical Hospital here in San Diego, she currently chairs the San Diego Community Response to Drug Overdose Task Force, bringing together the 3 Ps: public health, public safety, and prevention leaders. In 2012, she established and chaired the San Diego Prescription Drug Abuse Medical Task Force for the first of its kind here in California. So Dr. Ronit Lev, we'll give it to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for that kind introduction. And really, thank you for putting together this information. Really, you put together the 8 team in San Diego County to work on this problem, and to the White family. And I see people on the chat who lost friends and family. You are the reason that we are all very passionate and doing what we're doing to prevent further tragedy. So we always have you in mind. Next slide. So again, we've seen the data. Fentanyl is the #1 killer in ages 18 to 45 in the United States, more than suicide, accidents, everything. And that's why we're here to talk about that and to make that well known. Next slide. There are several California-wide legislations dealing with that. This is one that came from San Diego, and it's to include fentanyl in part of a drug screen that's done in a hospital. Most people don't realize that fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that doesn't show up in an opioid standard screen, and we're aiming to fix that gap. We've done that in most hospitals in San Diego, and we'll be the first in the nation to bring that statewide if Tyler Law is passed. And the law is named after Tyler, who went to the emergency department a few days before he died, tested negative for opioids, but was really positive for fentanyl, and his parents were not aware of that. Next slide. So I have 3 different messages to parents, loved ones, family, friends who care about this issue. And the 3 different messages apply to 3 different kids, young adults who and their interface with drugs. The first message is for kids and young adults who don't use drugs or who don't know that they're using drugs. And the message here is protect your brain. That's primary prevention. The brain is growing until age 25, and the risk of addiction goes up 7-fold of anything: tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, any drugs. It goes up while your brain is still growing. I also work in the emergency department and have not met a single person who overdosed or uses fentanyl that did not start their journey to drugs with marijuana, not one. So really, primary prevention is protecting your brain, explaining the growth of the neurons and myelin and synaptic pruning. Kids love that science. That's the kind of conversation I would have with that group, and really encourage primary prevention and preventing any drug use or exposure, especially when the brain is growing. Next slide. The second message is for kids who may be experimenting. And we've heard it over and over this evening that one pill can kill, one experiment could be your last experiment, one mistake could be a fatal mistake. Unlike the old days when, people our age, my age, used to experiment with drugs, it wasn't lethal. Now it's lethal. Why? Because heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, fake pills of oxycodone, hydrocodone, Xanax, Viagra, vaping products, and even marijuana have been found to be fentanyl and not what they're advertised to be. Next slide. And finally, for people who may be using drugs, the message is for the user and for the family and friends is that addiction is a treatable and chronic disease of the brain and should receive compassionate treatment, and that is available. There's treatment, there's harm reduction for people who are using drugs, and please seek out help for the person and for the family to help. Next slide. And next slides, I'm going to go through quickly because James Fontaine did such a nice job about explaining overdoses, but really having naloxone for drugs is like having an EpiPen for allergies. Every household where there may be drugs, including marijuana, should have naloxone. Now, naloxone doesn't work for marijuana. Naloxone doesn't work for cocaine or Xanax or other things, but we know that fentanyl has infiltrated the entire drug market, and that's why households now should have naloxone. Next slide. This just shows how opioids attach to an opioid receptor, and naloxone kicks off the opioids and attaches to the receptor in a much stronger way, and that's how it reverses an overdose. Next slide. the way people die from fentanyl or any opioids is they stop breathing. So imagine not breathing. What happens when you don't breathe? You turn blue, you start snoring, and there's a loud rattling sound. We've heard over and over again from our Team 10 that responds sadly to hundreds of overdoses that somebody heard a person snoring, but they thought they were just asleep, so they didn't wake them up. But if you hear that, really loud snoring, that sounds very strange. Go wake that person up. Make sure they can wake up. And if not, give naloxone and assume it's an overdose. It's okay if you're wrong. It's not okay if you wait too long. Next slide. And again, I want to just emphasize, you can't give too much naloxone. People have asked, is the dose the same as for adults and kids? Just give an adult dose to kids. You can't give too much of it. You won't hurt someone by giving too much. And also you won't hurt yourself. There's a lot of misinformation that by doing CPR or touching naloxone, you yourself can overdose. You will not overdose by a dermal exposure to the naloxone or by doing CPR. And there are good Samaritan laws protecting people. We really, if there's any doubt, just give the naloxone. And next slide. And I will share this slide with anybody who wants it, so you'll have that of what to do. Give naloxone, call 911, and everyone who gets naloxone needs to go to the hospital. Some people get damage to their lungs and need to be admitted. Giving naloxone doesn't mean like go on your way. If you get naloxone, you need to call 911. The person needs to go and get evaluated at the hospital in the emergency department. Next slide. And that's it. This is just a slide of my podcast and how to contact me if you need to do that. And I will pass that on. Thank you so much.
Dr. Lev, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very good. Summer, do you want to introduce Cindy?
Yes, it's my honor. Thank you so much, Dr. Lev. It's always amazing to hear you. Cindy Cipriani is a Senior Management Counsel and Director of Community Engagement for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of California. In this position, Cindy develops partnerships and programs that take a holistic approach to crime prevention. Cindy also co-chairs San Diego's Prescription Drug Abuse Task Force, a multidisciplinary opioid coalition that works to raise awareness and end the vicious cycle of addiction and overdose deaths. And Cindy, you have been a leader in making sure that the community can be a great partner and be aware of these issues that we are facing, so we don't face them alone in our offices. So please welcome.
Thank you so much, Summer, for the kind introduction and also for your longstanding partnership. What I'm going to present tonight is really a collaborative presentation, and many partners fed into this, including the coordinator, CCR of PDATF, DEA, a number of our other partners, the DA's office. We had a really active committee putting together what I hope will be really useful for you. And that is a toolkit on fentanyl that when you have these slides available, they're all available on the website. You can go over them with your community, with your kids, to any group that you think will be interested. And we're always available to assist with that. Any particular audiences that you think need to hear this message, we're happy to help you provide it, but we also want to empower you to provide it on your own. The way I structured this is really 10 ways to protect our kids from fentanyl, 10 practical suggestions that I hope that you can use with your kids. And I have to warn Miles, who's advancing the slides for me, some of my slides do have animation. You may have to advance more than once to get the full slide. Now, this is one slide that basically demonstrates how this fentanyl is mixed into the pills. With regard to the M30s, the Xanax pills, those are pills that are really pure fentanyl. It's not as if they're taking a pill and lacing it with fentanyl. They're creating a fentanyl pill. Next advance, please. And the way it works, it's just not quality controlled. It's not FDA approved, right? So if you look at all the binders in the pill as being the green dots and the active substance, the fentanyl, being the red dots, what you see is that in any given tablet, they're mushing it all together. They've got pill stampers, and they're coming out with tablets that may have all green, no fentanyl, or may have a lot of fentanyl. The one on the red, which is mostly red dots, which is all fentanyl. So when you're getting a pill, they all look the same. You have absolutely no idea in the tableting process how that pill was formed and how much fentanyl is in that pill. It's not like getting a prescription where everything is absolutely quality controlled. Next slide. So this is a game. We're going to do a few animations here, and it's a game you can play with your kids to see if they can spot the real thing, which is the real Beyonce. Next, advance. Many of the kids get this wrong. The kids get this right more than I do, though. Next slide. Which is the real Nike? Can you tell? It's pretty difficult to tell. Next slide. Now we start getting into the Percocets and the M30s, which are the real Percocets. Next slide. Xanax. They look pretty much the same. Even with the magnifying glass, can you tell the difference? Next, advance. And I think playing this with the kids, there are just a few more here. One more. Which is the real, which is the fake? They're both fake. That was a trick question. But the idea is it's really impossible to tell the real from the fake. And I think if you show this to your kids and they got an idea of just how dangerous the fake pills are and how difficult it is to tell real from fake, they would hesitate if they were at a party and somebody was passing around something that they said was a Percocet. Next slide. So if your kid cannot spot the real thing, if they view this and they realize they can't spot the real thing, it will give them, I think, great hesitation. Next slide. The next tip is to really monitor social media, because what we're seeing is that these pills are being sold on Snapchat. They're being sold through the iPhone, through chats, through apps, oftentimes encrypted ads. And it's really important to do a few things with your child to monitor their social media. Advance, please. So I would take notes of the social media sites your child visits. You could keep advancing. Talk with them about what they're seeing and posting. Keep track of their passwords and usernames so that you'll actually have the ability to get into their system to look at what they're posting, and set limits of the amount of time that they're online. Now, this is also important. It's really common now for folks who are buying drugs and selling drugs not to use words, but instead to use emoji drug codes. Advance, please. These are just some of the emoji drug codes. There are two more advances in there. It gives you an idea of just how difficult it can be to get a sense of what your kids are really doing. This sheet of emoji drug codes is part of the fentanyl toolkit that's available online, so don't feel like you need to memorize all these or turn back to the slide presentation. There's a handout that you can print and keep handy so that you'll know when you do look at your kids' chats exactly what it is they're doing and whether or not these drug codes are appearing. Next slide. I'm not going to go into this in detail. You can advance all the way through this because several folks have discussed the fentanyl overdose signs. I think it's important to go through them with your kids as well, because oftentimes it's the kids who see a friend overdosing. And oftentimes it's a child or a teenager who doesn't realize that in fact someone who was who looked to be sleeping was actually overdosing and that they should have called 911. Next slide. Now this is especially important because in interviewing kids, what we learned is that none of them would call 911 if they thought a friend was in trouble and had taken drugs and was overdosing from drugs. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but they're afraid of getting their friend in trouble. They're afraid of getting in trouble if they have drugs on them. And it's really important for them to know that the Good Samaritan Law often protects kids in situations like this. So if somebody acts in good faith and seeks medical assistance and emergency medical services, even if they have drugs on them or doing drugs with the person who was affected, they are protected by this law from certain drug crimes. Selling drugs is not included in this. So if they're the individual that actually supplied a deadly dose of fentanyl that caused someone to overdose, they are not protected. But if they just happen to be present and happen to be a co-user of drugs, they're protected, and they absolutely should call 911 and seek help for the overdose victim. Next slide. Add naloxone to your first aid kit. I saw several questions about where to get naloxone. That also is available on the PDATF website in the naloxone section, and also under the toolkit. There are many places to get naloxone and to get it essentially for free right now. So it's a really good time to get naloxone. It does not require a prescription, and the training is very easy. You can get trained on YouTube in a matter of minutes. Next slide. So talking to your kids about drugs, you can go ahead and just advance through these. If you're just exploring possible use, it's an easier conversation to go through some of these slides and educate your teen, your youth on what to expect and what some of the dangers are, to ask open-ended questions. If they've been to parties where pills are being passed around, to get a sense for what use is like at their school. When you actually have notice that your teen is doing drugs or that your child maybe has a drug problem, it's really important to get on the same page as your co-parent. If you have a co-parent, to be aware that your own drug use or your family's own drug or alcohol use will be part of the conversation. It could be called into question. To have all your evidence ready for the reasons why you're concerned. Expect anger, particularly if there's an addiction problem. The person's first goal oftentimes is to deny and protect their freedom because they're afraid of being grounded, or to deny because they're protecting their addiction. Set realistic goals, establish clear rules and consequences. Be ready to discuss addiction in the family. The goal really is to destigmatize this, to destigmatize addiction and get folks in the position where they're willing to seek treatment and realizing that this can be a medical problem. Next slide. I also really recommend that parents establish a text or call rescue plan with their kids. This is really, really a valuable approach. Your son or daughter may be at a party where folks are passing around, whether it's marijuana, cocaine, or fentanyl pills, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to get out of it. They don't know how to gracefully exit. Many parents have set up an exit plan where the teen will just send a simple text to the parent, X, and that parent will know when they see that code, something has come up, I need to come and get you. They'll send a text or call right back, and the teen will be delivered from the situation in a way that doesn't cause the teen embarrassment, doesn't cause a lot of confrontation. And one of the other aspects to this is the teen is welcome to share with you what all the circumstances were, but they don't get interrogated about who was there, what were they doing, and it's up to them whether they want to confide in you. The number one goal is to keep the teen safe. Next slide. Lastly, it's really important to monitor and safeguard RX opioids in your home. We still see so many teens who have developed an addiction, and they say it's because they started taking pills their parents had on hand, or they started taking pills when they had a sports injury or their wisdom teeth out. The protocols have changed greatly, so there are fewer and fewer people who are becoming addicted as a result of overprescribing, but it still can happen as a result of access to opioid pills in the home. If dependence occurs, get your child an evaluation. Treatment is available. That information is on the website as well and through the crisis line. It's available, it works, and particularly with opioid addiction, there's medication-assisted treatment that's very helpful. These are just a few resources. Almost everything I spoke about tonight is on the Community and Parent Fentanyl Toolkit, which is on the SDPDATF website. The conversation with your kids, if you're going down that road, really recommend you check out drugfree.org. They have pages and pages of helpful tips for parents who are just approaching that issue and ready to talk to their kids and their teens about it. So that's it for me. Please feel free to reach out to me or anyone at the coalition website and with the coalition for future presentations on this issue. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Cindy. That was very informative. I kind of like that. I failed, but the faker or real test was quite astonishing there. We got quite a few questions. I want to try to get to as many of them as we can. I do want to, Matt White, I'm going to ask you a question real quick, because earlier today you and I had a chance to talk, and I didn't hear it brought up, but you had mentioned about how deliveries can be made. You know, it just doesn't, if your child orders a pill online, the delivery method you had mentioned was kind of unique. And if you could kind of make just tell us briefly what you learned about that.
Well, yeah. So, you know, we did get into some of Connor's social media after the fact. And it was clear that he was having drugs delivered to the house. They'd leave it in the mailbox, and, you know, they would leave it around the side of the house. And this is one of the things that hasn't really been mentioned, and that is cash flow and observing how your kids are spending money. And my recommendation is give them a prepaid Visa card, because you can't buy drugs with that, not from a dealer. You can do it with Venmo, you can do it with cash, but if you give them a prepaid Visa card, then anything they buy is going to require a card swipe, and with no opportunity for them to actually try to pull cash out of that Visa card. But again, this is just kind of, you know, this is all hindsight for me. But that's something that I would be very clear about with your kids is monitoring where their money is going, because that happened right under my nose, and I didn't know what was going on.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, because I think you actually told me deliveries could be made. They'll put it behind a tree, or they'll put it in some obscure place on your property, and like somehow it doesn't just come in a package like an Amazon or something like that.
Right.
It comes in different forms. And so, well, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to get to these questions, if we can answer them as quickly as we can. This first one, I guess, it is for potentially Summer, our district attorney. People have asked about Narcan or naloxone. Do you need a prescription? Where can parents get it? Where can kids get it? How do you get a hold of naloxone or Narcan and have it on hand?
Well, in some of now there's a law that anywhere, and you should, if you are trying to get a loved one into treatment, make sure that they are complying with the law that requires them now to have Narcan on hand. Sadly, there are treatment programs that don't even have Narcan, and people are overdosing in treatment programs. Maybe Dr. Lev can give us more in terms of the pharmacy and getting them from the pharmacy. I know that when there is an opioid prescription, people can get alongside it a Narcan, but how can they get just a Narcan prescription?
One way is if there are several ways. One, you could get to your doctor. Two, you could go directly to a pharmacy and ask. There's standing orders from the county to just go into a pharmacy and ask. Sometimes that's not available, or there are insurance issues. I offer a free prescription on my website, hightruths.com, to anybody who wants one, no question asked. It should be over the counter. And since it's not ever over the counter, that's what I do.
All right, so you can walk into a pharmacy and ask for that potentially, and hopefully they have it. Because can you do it at CVS or Walgreens? Yeah,
I won't promise that it'll be useful 100%, but theoretically the system should work like that.
Okay, great. We had another question here. I think this is for Dr. Campman. The question was, what's the most common substance, drug, or product that's been laced with fentanyl? I'm sure you discussed, I guess, the limits of these and exposure, but what's the most common drug you find that's been laced with fentanyl?
Well, I think fentanyl. So we're seeing plain fentanyl out there, and we're seeing pills that are fentanyl. They're made to look like something else. So, laced with it's when we see a person that's died, we can see what's in their blood. So we know what's in them, and we may see fentanyl and some acetaminophen, Tylenol, or fentanyl and cocaine, or fentanyl and methamphetamine. So I can't tell just from the person if they used two separate things, or if fentanyl was mixed into what they were using, or if they just used fentanyl. I think some of the federal people may have information about that.
Okay, well,
And James and Adam, from the reports that I read, I see a lot of M30 pills, the blue pills. Is that still what we're seeing most commonly?
Well, it depends if we're talking about the youth, the younger ones. Pills still seem to be prevalent and the primary source of overdoses for those under 17. But there are some people under 17 who have overdosed from powder. And so then when we look at the powders, we're seeing routinely, like the lacing is an interesting choice of word. It's hard to tell. We are hearing stories of people that are intentionally taking multi or different substances. They'll take cocaine and then also use fentanyl. They'll use methamphetamine and fentanyl. We have had cases where people thought they were taking cocaine and they were given something that they were told was cocaine and turned out to be fentanyl, and they overdosed and died. So we're certainly getting those cases. It's hard to pinpoint which drug would be the most prevalent. Methamphetamine, just in terms of volume, is most prevalent in our community. And so I think that stands the biggest risk of having fentanyl intentionally or unintentionally mixed with it.
well, James, we also had a question on, and I noticed Snapchat was mentioned earlier. What other social media sites are fake drugs being purchased on? I think it was Snapchat, Facebook, and Instagram.
Yeah.
Are those still the most prevalent ones, or?
Those are the prevalent social media ones. And then there's other just private encrypted communication networks that people will use. WhatsApp is one of them that I'm sure other ones are escaping my mind right now. Telegram, I think, is the name of another one. But these are encrypted apps so not necessarily social media, but encrypted communication systems that allow people to sell and buy drugs are being used. But those Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook right now appear to be the major ones.
And I understand, I've never been on it, but Snapchat, your message disappears after 30 seconds or goes into oblivion. Is that right?
That's right. And I don't remember the exact time frame, but it is a very short time frame in which you can put on your message and then it disappears.
Okay. Well, here's a question for either Cindy or Dr. Lev. At what age is the average for kids in San Diego County to start experimenting with pills? The questionnaire says, my kids are under 12 and I'm not concerned now, but wondering, when to start, these potential problems or they could start or when I would guess as soon as you give your kid a cell phone is when these potential problems, but is there kids under 12? Are they pretty much, we're seeing those?
Actually younger than that. Addiction starts in middle school. The average age by the time they get to Dr. Campman's office, it's in around in their 40s, but the process of addiction starts in middle school. So starting to talk to your kids about drugs, not just pills, but drugs in general, tobacco, alcohol, drugs, pills, that starts at a young age, at age 9 or 10. And you do it in an age appropriate way and continuing that conversation.
All right. Well, so then here's another one. I guess this is for you then, Dr. Lev, is how do parents get their kids drug tested? I mean, or do they have to call a doctor? Or is there something you buy over the counter? I have no idea. So how do you get your kid drug tested?
You could buy almost anything on Amazon today. So they do sell drug kits on Amazon. I think that's one of the things parents could use. You got to check though, like we know with Untitled Law, that it includes fentanyl, because a standard opioid test does not include fentanyl, which is a synthetic drug. It requires a different method of testing. Synthetic means it's made from a lab. versus like heroin that comes from a poppy seed or from
Okay.
agriculture.
All right, well, here's another question. So it's addressed to either James or Summer. I recently was shocked to learn that fentanyl has penetrated the elementary school system in Escondido. How do third, fourth, or fifth graders, how do they distribute on an elementary campus? This is pretty spooky. Is this the norm, or is this rare to be on an elementary campus?
Now, we haven't had a lot of reports of elementary, but it's very important that anything that you hear, you don't have to be correct. We want to know about it. And if you're not comfortable calling your law enforcement because you think it may be a hoax and not real, you can still call Crime Stoppers anonymously, and they will feed it to the local law enforcement. And it'll allow us to do undercover operations, to look further, to call the school. You don't have to be right. If you're worried about something to do with kids' safety, whether it's a threat to the school or a dangerous drug in the school, please call your law enforcement. And as an alternative, if you don't think it's 911 and you want to be anonymous, you can call Crime Stoppers.
All right. Can marijuana be laced with fentanyl or the edibles? And I'm not sure who could take that one, Cindy or?
We have seen that the vaping products with marijuana, I know of situations where they were laced with fentanyl. I've not seen that with the edibles. That doesn't mean that it wouldn't occur. I mean, I think, again, if you're buying it on the street at the dispensaries, I assume there's some quality control there in a licensed dispensary. It's another reason not to get drugs from unknown sources.
Okay.
There have been reports from other states outside California of marijuana associated fentanyl in California and San Diego. The only ones that we know about that we've documented is vape pens that have had fentanyl in them. And we have not documented fentanyl in the flour or edible products in California. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. It's still possible, but we have not seen that.
Okay. Well, someone mentioned, and I'd heard about this, I think on a radio show or something like that, about fentanyl test strips. Do they work? Are these legitimate? How do they work? I'm not. Anybody got
fentanyl test strips is part of harm reduction. Harm reduction are things that we just mentioned. Narcan is harm reduction. We want to save people who may be using unintentionally, and save them from an overdose. Fentanyl test strips are intended for testing drugs that you usually that you don't think is fentanyl, right? So I've met people who think they're using cocaine, they heard about fentanyl, and they'll test their cocaine to make sure that it doesn't have fentanyl in it. And that they use fentanyl test strips to do that. And that is recommended. And we do have a harm reduction project out of San Diego County that includes fentanyl test strips, and they can also be bought online.
On Amazon, probably, huh?
It was actually my understanding that to get fentanyl test strips, you have to go through a syringe exchange service. So I think under California law, as it is right now, that's how it's interpreted. And you could get it through the Harm Reduction Coalition or through family health centers that offer syringe exchange services.
Yeah,
I have seen them online as well. dancesafe.org sells them, and Amazon.
Just to note on the fentanyl test strips, remember there's lots of different analogs of fentanyl. So even if you're having a negative test with the fentanyl test strip, that doesn't mean that the substance you're consuming is all of a sudden safe.
That's absolutely true.
okay, thank you. Adam, did you have anything else you wanted to add just to any of these questions? I'm sorry I didn't specifically ask you on those, but you're...
No. At this point, I think we've covered everything very directly, so I appreciate that, though.
Okay. Let's see. It's there's a question here. How much fentanyl and the precursors are entering the country through U.S. seaports? I don't know if anybody knows that. If they're coming in from other than across the border, are they coming in through seaports?
I guess I'll take this one. I mean, seaports, there's certainly different methods by which drug trafficking organizations bring drugs into the country, but the most standard method is through the land port of entries.
Okay. Summer, this one I think is for you. This is, from Elena McDonald. Her daughter died in January of 2022 from fentanyl poisoning. And after her death, she was upset, I guess, that there wasn't sufficient San Diego police work. And she was kind of upset about the police work and how she is still grieving for her daughter and how can they put these drug dealers behind bars. And you kind of spoke to that earlier, Summer, but also if in the case with Connor, it was a minor that sold him the fentanyl laced drug. How do you deal with minors? I guess deal with the murderers and it was what they really are. And how do you deal with them if they're minors?
So for Elena, I'm very sorry for your loss, and I don't know the situation, but it is important that you get the answers that you need to get. And so one thing I recommend is that you call our victim services program, or just go on SanDiegoDA.com and put into contact us what the situation is. If you have the police report number, we will be glad to follow up and figure out what is going on. Sometimes these investigations do take a long time and families don't have answers as quick as we'd like, but let us look into it and see if we can get you some answers. On the minors, you're right, Supervisor, the laws are, really not there with minors selling. The federal counterparts who have very tough laws aren't able to handle minors, so we handle them on the state side, and usually they are getting, sentences that are more of the rehabilitation nature. They're just not any tough laws when it comes to minors, unless it's what we call a 707B charge, which is one of the enumerated charges in a code. One of them is murder, but you'd have to get the evidence to show that the drug dealer knew that they were selling fentanyl and that it was a deadly dose of fentanyl. You need additional evidence than just selling the drug.
Okay. This one's for me, actually. Somebody asked, fentanyl has been described as an epidemic with 2021 fatalities nearly doubling the number of COVID fatalities. Has a county issued a local emergency proclamation? If not, why not? And if not, when? We are actively working on that. And I do want to mention, I know this is, Summer and I have partnered on this. All the Board of Supervisor members are adamantly against any fentanyl distribution there, or fentanyl and people dying from fentanyl. So know that we are all on board with this. I have asked the county to come back with a plan so we can get out an information plan to get out to people as best we can. They're still working on that, but this is an emergency, and I'm going to be putting something forward here to declaring an emergency. And it's poison, it's murder, and this needs to be dealt with. So yes, that is coming. We may be too late, but it's something that we're still working on, and we're going to go after it. Let's see. I think there's one more. It says, does the innovative approach in addressing overdose include GIS? I guess mapping of where these overdoses occur, such as enhancing current pulse point app. I'm not even sure what that is, and to include nearby overdose naloxone needed. I guess it could be on an app, or critical alerts. Also, will there be an increased naloxone distribution out in there in zip codes that potentially have higher thresholds or prevalences of overdose? That's quite a question, but as far as the GIS and mapping, Summer, do you have anything on that?
Yes, the DEA is leading a project with HIDA, which is the high intensity, and we're one of the areas, the high intensity drug regions. to have those OD maps, and they're supposed to be there in order to identify those hotspots and allow us to respond appropriately, whether it's through Narcan or additional enforcement or putting out timely warnings to people in an area. We now have to do it more by just our own communication with each other. We had a situation where in Pacific Beach, there were multiple overdose deaths. We were able to kind of figure out the region and put out that information on social media immediately to alert people, but that's an old-fashioned way of doing it. We're trying to convert to this more technologically immediate real-time OD maps. So I appreciate the question, and we're looking forward to having that additional tool soon.
Is anyone familiar with the Pulse Point app? Because the question is enhancing this current app to include nearby overdose, naloxone needed, critical. It sounds like a
I don't know if it's the app. We need to ask the person. There is an app, like if it's somebody has CPR and you sign up. So there's a lot of people who are in the medical community, and they could be sitting at a restaurant and they don't even know that next door there's a CPR and they could have gone to help. I don't know if that's the app that they're talking about, where you as a medical provider or would get an alert, and if it's somewhere near you, you can go and help with the rescue.
sounds like almost like a localized Amber Alert or something like that. If could go out to others if they were that Amber type alert that naloxone needed or something like that. Sounds actually like a pretty good idea. We're kind of getting towards the end here. Does any of our panelists want to say something they didn't get to say, or want to get out here before we wrap up?
I wanted to, just from my experience of talking to parents about how to talk to kids on any difficult topic, whether it's internet crimes against children, human trafficking, overdoses, drugs, an easy way that parents have shared with me and I've shared with them is to not talk directly to the child as if they are the ones that are using the drug or engaged in the dangerous activity, but to talk in terms of making the child a protector of others by educating your child, because this may be happening to one of their friends and you want them to really know this information so that they can intervene and be the helper to save their friend from a dangerous situation. Parents tell me this has worked better because the child doesn't put up the defenses that this is not happening, that they're not doing anything wrong, but rather can kind of listen until you finish the discussion and help your child to absorb the information about how dangerous this is and how today's curiosity is really tomorrow's funeral, as we've sadly heard shared and as we see in the chat.
Well, thank you very much, Summer, and we appreciate that. I want to thank all our speakers, Dr. Campman for speaking up. To Matt and Laura White, thank you so much for sharing a very difficult situation. Adam Gordon, thank you very much. Summer as well, Dr. Lev, and also Cindy Cipriani, all the speakers. Forgot James Fontaine. I just want everyone to know that we're gonna email everybody who signed up for tonight's event all the links. You'll have all the PowerPoints. This is going to be recorded, so I don't know if it might be on our YouTube channel or something like that. I thought this was fantastic. Everyone shared. I think did a fantastic job of letting parents know what they can do, and they can always call my office for any other information, or any of the other participants. A lot of them put information up in the PowerPoints, and this was great. Thank you very much. I think we need to get this information out to more and more parents and to schools and to educators. And just thank you. I learned a lot tonight, and you can call my office on any time for any of these things, but we'll definitely get everybody the information who asked and requested. Thanks for being here.
I just want to applaud you, Jim and Summer, for fighting this fight for us as parents.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome, Laura. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We're gonna keep fighting. We're not quitting here. So thanks everybody for joining. Reach out if you need any more information. Thank you.